Okay, so we had a question about resistance. The question was basically, why do we have it? Why do we feel like we want to go in one direction and find ourselves going in another? Why do we fight against the things that are good for us, that our highest self wants? And this is a really common struggle, and we've addressed it before, but we can't be in the work of recovery and not have resistance come up. So I believe that resistance is part of recovery. And I have an expression that we need to roll with our resistance, meaning when we fight head to head with our resistance, the resistance gets stronger oftentimes, right? Our inner rebel comes out to play, and we have a harder time making progress in the ways that we want to make progress. And so I think that the key is to acknowledge our resistance, to ask our resistance to teach us what we need to know. We can write a letter from our resistance to ourselves, stream of consciousness kind of letter coming from that resistant part, sharing everything that it needs to say. And to understand that the resistance doesn't need to call the shots. Where does it come from? It comes from our draw to the familiar. Even when the familiar is toxic or damaging to us, even downright dangerous, we can still find comfort in the familiar. And that's one of the reasons why we have resistance. And it's resistance to change. Okay, it's resistance to things being different because we often can't imagine what the different will be like. We may have fantasies about all the great things that will happen with our recovery, and that's awesome, and it can motivate us, but it can often incite fear too, fear of the unknown, fear of not being able to handle the changes that happen, fear of just being a different person in the world. As much as there may be discomfort in the current, the unknown can feel really scary. And so I think the best solution, so to speak, for resistance is number one, to acknowledge it, for us to ask the resistance to teach us what we need to know, and then to slowly and steadily and consistently move in the direction of how we want to feel and how we want to be, how our highest self wants to be. This is where contrary action comes in. This is where we have to do things that we don't necessarily want to do, but we know will get us to the place that we ultimately want to be, where our highest self wants to live. And so I think talking about the resistance with others, acknowledging it, writing about it, also helps dissipate it. So I hope that's helpful. Just know that you're not doing anything wrong if you have resistance. It can feel surprising to have resistance when we think we want to change so badly, and yet we find ourselves self-sabotaging and working against ourselves. And the fear of change is really common, it's real. And in that process, I think it's really important to do things that help you feel safe, that aren't part of the pathology you're trying to release. I hope that makes sense. Tapping is another awesome way for us to work through resistance. We can't work through resistance necessarily with the conscious mind, alone. The conscious mind is one part of it, but using other modalities, including tapping, including the meditations that we're doing, all of these things access parts of the mind and the body that we don't necessarily have conscious awareness of, and can help us kind of release that resistance, our kind of turn to fight or flight mode when we feel threatened by change, and help us kind of move forward, hopefully with more equanimity.